The bullet that killed Corporal Jenkins came from nowhere. 1 second he was checking the corner of the building, his M4 raised and ready. The next, his head snapped back and he crumpled to the ground like a puppet with cut strings. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen watched it happen from 15 feet away and felt his blood turn to ice. "Sniper!" he screamed, diving behind a demolished wall. "Get to cover, now!" The rest of the Ranger Team 2-6 scattered, but they were already in the kill zone. Chen could see it now. They'd been herded into this street like cattle, pushed by small arms fire from the east until they'd clustered in the worst possible location. Every approach was covered by elevated firing positions. Every piece of cover was a trap. They were completely exposed. Another crack. Specialist Morrison took a round through the shoulder and went down screaming. Private Davies dragged him behind a burned-out car, but Chen could see the blood pumping from the wound. Arterial hit. Morrison had maybe 5 minutes without immediate treatment. Then, the enemy opened up with everything they had. A PKM machine gun roared to life from a third-story window, its heavy 7.62mm rounds chewing through the street like a chainsaw through wood. Concrete exploded in white puffs, metal sparked and pinged, the air filled with the angry buzz of bullets searching for flesh. "Contact left! Multiple hostiles!" Martinez screamed, returning fire with his M4. But his shots were wild, desperate. They were pinned down and everyone knew it. Chen risked a glance around his cover. He counted at least 15 enemy fighters in elevated positions, maybe more. They had the Rangers in a perfect crossfire, every angle covered. This wasn't a random ambush. This was a carefully planned execution. An RPG streaked across the street, trailing smoke. It impacted the wall behind Thompson, and the blast wave picked him up and slammed him into the ground. He lay there motionless, blood streaming from his ears. "Thompson's down!" someone yelled. Chen's mind raced through their options. They could try to fight their way out, but that meant crossing open ground under heavy fire. They could wait for support, but the nearest QRF was at least 20 minutes away, and they'd all be dead in 5. They could call for air support, but the close quarters made it too dangerous. They had no good options, only degrees of bad. "Ranger 2-6, this is Overlord. Report status, over." Chen pressed himself against the crumbling wall, trying to keep his voice steady as bullets chipped concrete inches from his head. "Overlord 2-6, we are in contact. Heavy enemy fire from multiple positions. We have 2 casualties, 1 critical. Grid coordinates." The world exploded. The IED had been buried in the street, triggered remotely once the Rangers were clustered together. The blast was massive. Chen felt it before he heard it, a wall of pressure that squeezed his chest and made his vision go white. Debris rained down. Something hot and sharp grazed his cheek. His ears rang with a high-pitched whine that drowned out everything else. When his vision cleared, he saw Private Williams sprawled in the middle of the street, his uniform smoking, his legs twisted at wrong angles. Davies was trying to crawl toward him, but machine gun fire forced him back. "Williams! Somebody get Williams!" Chen shouted, though he could barely hear his own voice over the ringing in his ears. A figure darted from cover. It was Private Mendez, the youngest member of the squad, barely 20 years old. He sprinted toward Williams with complete disregard for the bullet snapping past his head. He almost made it. The enemy sniper's bullet caught Mendez in mid-stride. He tumbled forward, momentum carrying him another 3 feet before he hit the ground and didn't move. Chen felt something break inside him. Mendez, Jenkins, Morrison bleeding out, Thompson unconscious, Williams screaming in the street. This wasn't combat. This was slaughter. Any station, this is Ranger 2-6. His voice cracked with desperation. "We are trapped in a kill zone, taking casualties. We need immediate fire support or we're all dead. Over." Another RPG, another explosion. The burned-out car that Davies and Morrison were hiding behind lurched as the warhead detonated against its far side. Davies emerged from the smoke, dragging Morrison, his face a mask of blood and determination. "Martinez!" Chen yelled. "Covering fire!" Martinez popped up and emptied his magazine at the enemy positions. It wouldn't do much good. They were too far away, too well protected. But it might buy Davies a few seconds. Those seconds cost Martinez his life. The PKM gunner shifted his aim and stitched a line of bullets across Martinez's position. The Ranger jerked once, twice, 3 times as the rounds found him, then collapsed. Chen's throat constricted. Martinez had been with him for 2 years. They'd survived 3 deployments together. They'd made plans to open a bar when they got out of the army, and now he was gone, killed trying to save someone else. "We don't have 30 minutes, Chen roared into the radio, answering Overlord's promise of QRF arrival. "We need help now." Around him, his Rangers were dying. 8 men left from a squad of 12, and the enemy was preparing for the final push. He could see them massing in the buildings, moving into assault positions. In less than a minute, they'd rush the Rangers' position, and it would be over. Chen thought about his wife Sarah, about his daughter Emma, who'd just turned 6, about the promise he'd made to come home safe. He thought about all the things he'd never get to do, all the moments he'd miss. He closed his eyes. Then a new voice came over the radio. Female, calm, absolutely confident. "Ranger 26, this is Shadow 17. I have eyes on your position. Count 4 dozen hostiles in elevated positions preparing to assault. I'm engaging now. Keep your heads down and trust me." Before Chen could respond, the world changed. The enemy sniper who'd killed Jenkins, positioned in a window on the 4th floor of a building 200 meters away, jerked backward as his head exploded in a red mist. The fighter next to him started to turn, confused, trying to understand what had just happened to his partner. He never figured it out. Aimee's second shot took him in the throat, the bullet severing his spine and dropping him instantly. 3 seconds later, the PKM gunner who'd been tearing the Rangers apart suddenly slumped over his weapon. A neat hole punched through his skull. The heavy machine gun went silent. Chen watched in stunned amazement as the enemy force that had been about to overrun his position began dying with methodical precision. Every 3 to 4 seconds, another fighter fell. Not wounded, killed instantly with surgical accuracy. The shots were coming from somewhere to the west, but Chen couldn't see the shooter. All he could see was the devastating effect. An enemy fighter carrying an RPG tried to reposition to get a better angle on the Rangers. He made it exactly 4 steps before a bullet caught him in the chest. The RPG launcher clattered from his dying hands and fell to the street below. Another hostile attempted to coordinate the assault, speaking urgently into a radio. Aimee's crosshairs found him through a gap in the concrete barrier he was hiding behind, a space no bigger than a dinner plate. She squeezed the trigger. The radio fell silent mid-transmission. A fighter tried to provide covering fire with an AK-47, leaning out from a doorway in short, controlled bursts. Professional, disciplined, it didn't save him. Aimee had already calculated his pattern of movement, anticipated where he'd appear next. When he leaned out for his 3rd burst, her bullet was waiting for him. The enemy commander, a tall man in tactical gear who'd been directing the assault from a 2nd-story balcony, suddenly realized something was catastrophically wrong. He grabbed a fighter next to him, apparently giving orders to find the sniper. Both men died before the conversation finished, Aimee's shots coming so close together they almost sounded like one. 2 militants tried to flee, scrambling down from their rooftop position using a fire escape. She took the first one as he descended, the bullet striking him between the shoulder blades and pitching him forward. He fell 3 stories and landed with an impact that Chen could hear from 40 meters away. The second fighter froze on the ladder, paralyzed with fear. Aimee's next shot ended his indecision permanently. An enemy fighter thought he'd found safety behind a concrete pillar. He pressed himself against it, breathing hard, trying to make himself as small as possible. But Aimee had seen him enter that position, had marked it in her mental catalog of targets. She waited patiently until he shifted his weight, exposing just enough of his torso. The shot was impossibly precise, threading through the narrow gap and finding its target. "Jesus Christ," Martinez breathed from his position. "Who is that?" The enemy force, which had been coordinated and professional just moments before, dissolved into chaos. They were being systematically slaughtered by an invisible killer, and their discipline cracked. Some tried to flee, some tried to hide, some froze in place, too terrified to move. None of it saved them. The shooting continued for another 3 minutes. Chen counted the shots, 37 in total. 37 enemy fighters eliminated by a single shooter in less than 4 minutes. It was the most devastating display of marksmanship he had ever witnessed. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the shooting stopped. The street was silent except for the moaning of wounded men and the crackle of burning vehicles. Ranger 2-6, this is Shadow 1-7. Immediate threat is neutralized. I'm displacing to overwatch your extraction point. Ground QRF will reach you in 23 minutes. You're clear to move your casualties. Chen found his voice. Shadow 1-7, who are you? What? How did you? There was a pause, then a hint of amusement in the response. Just a girl with a rifle, Sergeant. Now take care of your wounded. Shadow 1-7 out. The connection went dead. Chen stared at the radio for a long moment, then looked around at his surviving Rangers. They were all looking back at him with the same expression of shock and disbelief and overwhelming relief. They'd been dead men. Finished? Done. And then she'd appeared out of nowhere and given them a miracle. Martinez, Chen said, his voice hoarse. Help Davies with Morrison. Thompson, Williams, check the perimeter. Everyone else, prep for extraction. As his Rangers moved to obey, Chen looked toward the west, toward wherever Shadow 1-7 had been positioned. He couldn't see her, couldn't see any sign that she'd ever been there, but he knew. They all knew. An angel with a sniper rifle had saved their lives, and somewhere in the back of his mind, Chen wondered, who was she? Where had she come from? And how in God's name had she made those impossible shots? He'd find out later that her name was Aimee Collins, that she was one of the Army's most elite snipers, and that the 37 kills she'd just made were barely a fraction of her total count. But in that moment, all he knew was that his Rangers were alive. Against all odds, against all reasonable expectations, they were going to make it home, because she'd been there, because she'd answered their whispered prayer for a miracle. 4 weeks earlier, Aimee Collins pressed her eye to the scope and let out half a breath. Through the magnified optics, she could see her target 783 meters away, a man-sized steel silhouette standing in the middle of an empty range, heat shimmer making it waver and dance. Wind 3 miles per hour, left to right, her spotter Danny Ramirez said quietly. Humidity 62%, temperature 94 degrees. You're good to engage. Aimee made minute adjustments, calculating the ballistics automatically. At this range, with these conditions, her 175-grain Sierra Match King would drop approximately 9 feet and drift about 6 inches left. She adjusted her point of aim accordingly and let her breathing slow to almost nothing. The world narrowed to the space between heartbeats. Squeeze. The M110 semi-automatic sniper system bucked against her shoulder. Through the scope, she watched the bullet's impact, center mass on the target exactly where she'd aimed. Hit, Ramirez confirmed. Dead center. That's 20 for 20 today, Collins. You're on fire. Aimee saved her weapon and sat up, wiping sweat from her forehead. The range at Forward Operating Base Crimson was brutal in the afternoon heat, but she practiced here every day. Muscle memory and repetition, that's what made the impossible shots possible when lives were on the line. Again, she said, settling back into position. Same target, but give me different wind conditions. Ramirez shook his head with a grin. You're a machine, you know that? Most snipers would be happy hitting 20 out of 20 and calling it a day. Most snipers haven't seen what happens when you miss. The grin faded from Ramirez's face. He'd been Aimee's spotter for 6 months, long enough to know that she carried ghosts. Every sniper did. The memory of shots that mattered, of moments when a fraction of an inch meant the difference between a soldier living or dying. All right, he said, checking his instruments. Wind now at 5 miles per hour, quartering from the right. Temperature holding steady. Aimee adjusted and fired again. Another hit. They continued until sunset, until Aimee had put 50 rounds through her rifle and hit 50 targets at ranges varying from 400 to nearly 900 meters. Only then did she clean her weapon and head back to her quarters. The compound was quiet in the evening. Most soldiers were either at chow or relaxing before the night shift began. Aimee walked alone, preferring the solitude. At 5'7" and 135 pounds, She didn't look like what most people expected from an elite sniper. She'd learned to use that to her advantage. People underestimated her right up until the moment she proved them wrong. In her quarters, she field-stripped the M110 with practiced efficiency, cleaning each component meticulously. The rifle was more than just a tool. It was an extension of herself, a precision instrument that demanded respect and care. She'd made modifications to the trigger assembly, the stock, and the scope mounting system until the weapon was perfectly tailored to her shooting style. A knock on her door interrupted her maintenance routine. "Collins, you in there?" She recognized the voice, Sergeant First Class Mike Patterson, one of the operations NCOs. "Come in, Sergeant." Patterson entered, holding a folder. His expression was serious. "Got new tasking for you. Colonel wants to see you at 2100 for a briefing." "What's the mission?" "Above my pay grade, but scuttlebutt is they're pulling you off regular rotations for a special assignment." Patterson handed her the folder. "This is the pre-brief. You've got 2 hours to review it before you meet the colonel." After he left, Aimee opened the folder and began reading. What she found made her pulse quicken with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The northern sector had become a killing ground. Over the past month, 3 Ranger platoons had been ambushed, resulting in 15 killed in action and 23 wounded. The enemy was using sophisticated tactics, coordinated attacks, well-placed IEDs, and what appeared to be trained snipers of their own. American forces were taking unsustainable casualties. Intelligence suggested the attacks were being coordinated by a former military officer, possibly someone with special operations training. He'd organized the various militant factions in the sector into an effective fighting force that was systematically targeting American patrols. The folder included after-action reports from the ambushes. Aimee read them carefully, noting the patterns. The enemy was good, very good. They understood American tactics and procedures. They knew how to exploit weaknesses, and they had patience, waiting for exactly the right moment to strike. At 2100 hours, she reported to Colonel Harrington's office. He was a lean, gray-haired man in his early 50s who'd spent most of his career in special operations. He got straight to the point. "Collins, you've read the brief. The situation in the north is untenable. We're losing good soldiers to an enemy that's outthinking us at every turn." He pulled up a map on his computer screen. "I need someone who can operate independently, who can think like a sniper, but fight like a guerrilla. Someone who can find this enemy commander and eliminate him before he kills any more of our people." "You want me to hunt him?" "I want you to be the apex predator in that sector. You'll have full tactical autonomy, no restrictions on movement, no requirement to coordinate with ground forces unless you choose to. Your mission is simple. Find the threats and eliminate them." Aimee studied the map, her mind already working through the tactical problems. "I'll need a good spotter. You'll have Ramirez. I understand you two work well together. What about rules of engagement?" "Standard ROE, but I'm giving you authorization to engage any hostile forces threatening our personnel. If you have positive ID and a clear shot, your weapon's free." Harrington leaned forward. "Collins, I'm not going to lie to you. This is going to be dangerous. You'll be operating in hostile territory with minimal support. But you're the best sniper we have in theater, and I believe you can turn this situation around." "When do I deploy?" "Tomorrow at 0600. Questions?" Aimee had dozens of questions, but she knew most of them would be answered in the field. "No, sir, I'm ready." "Good. And Collins, bring our people home alive." "That's the plan, sir." The next morning, Aimee and Ramirez loaded into a convoy bound for the northern sector. The drive took 3 hours, most of it through territory that varied from urban sprawl to agricultural land to barren desert. The landscape was deceptively peaceful, but Aimee knew that peace was a lie. They were dropped off at Patrol Base Phoenix, a fortified compound that served as the operational hub for Ranger units in the sector. The base commander, Major Richardson, met them at the gate with an expression that mixed hope and desperation. "Collins, Ramirez, thank God you're here. We lost another patrol yesterday, 2 KIA, 4 wounded. The Rangers are starting to think this sector is cursed." "Show me where the ambushes have been happening," Aimee said, following Richardson to the operations center. The map told a grim story. Red markers indicated ambush sites, clustered along the main patrol routes. Blue markers showed American positions. What struck Aimee immediately was the sophistication of the enemy's positioning. They'd identified every vulnerable point in the Rangers' patrol patterns and exploited them mercilessly. "They're watching us," she said, tracing the ambush sites with her finger. "They've got observation posts somewhere with clear views of our patrol routes. That's how they know exactly when and where to hit us." Richardson nodded. "Intelligence thinks the same thing, but we haven't been able to locate their OPs." "That's because you've been looking in the obvious places." Aimee studied the map more carefully, noting the terrain features and lines of sight. They're not using buildings or traditional high ground. They're using positions that give them just enough elevation to see over obstacles, but not so much that they're obvious. "Can you find them?" "Give me 3 days." For the next 72 hours, Aimee and Ramirez conducted what she called terrain reconnaissance, moving through the sector in civilian vehicles, dressed in local clothing, observing patterns and studying the landscape with a sniper's eye. It was painstaking work that required patience and attention to detail. But gradually, the pattern emerged. The enemy had established a network of observation posts using natural features, a slight rise in the terrain here, a cluster of trees there, an abandoned water tank that gave just enough height without being obvious. These positions were manned by spotters who would radio warnings when American patrols approached. On the 4th day, Aimee was ready to act. She and Ramirez established a sniper hide in an abandoned building on the outskirts of the city, arriving well before dawn. The position gave them a clear view of 2 suspected enemy OPs, one at 400 meters, another at 570. They settled in to wait. Sniper work was 90% patience and 10% execution. Aimee had learned to embrace the waiting, to use it as meditation time. She controlled her breathing, kept her muscles relaxed, and maintained absolute focus on the task ahead. At 0642, the first enemy spotter appeared at OP1. Male, mid-20s, carrying binoculars and a radio. He moved with military precision, someone with training, not just a random militant. "I have target 1, Aimee whispered. "Range 403 meters. "Confirmed," Ramirez replied, his eye pressed to the spotting scope. "Wind 2 miles per hour, left to right. Temp is 68 degrees. You're clear." Aimee settled the crosshairs on the target's center mass, adjusted for the minimal wind drift, and took up trigger pressure. Her breathing slowed to almost nothing. The world narrowed to the view through her scope. Squeeze. The M110 fired with a suppressed crack. Through her optics, Aimee watched the bullet impact. The target jerked and collapsed, dead before he hit the ground. "Hit," Ramirez confirmed. "Target down." 6 minutes later, a second spotter appeared at OP2. He lasted exactly as long as it took Aimee to calculate the ballistics and squeeze the trigger. They remained in position for another hour, but no one else appeared at the OPs. Eventually, they packed their gear and displaced to a new location, leaving no evidence they'd ever been there. Over the next week, Aimee and Ramirez systematically dismantled the enemy's observation network. 9 enemy spotters eliminated, 9 OPs rendered useless. The impact was immediate. Ranger patrols reported dramatically reduced contact with enemy forces. Without their intelligence network, the militants couldn't coordinate effective ambushes. But Aimee knew this was only temporary. The enemy would adapt, find new methods, establish new positions. Which is why she began planning Phase 2 of her operation, hunting the leadership. Intelligence reports indicated that the enemy commander, the former military officer who'd organized the sector's militant factions, operated from a compound on the western edge of the city. The compound was well defended, surrounded by high walls and constantly patrolled by armed guards. A direct assault would be suicide. But Aimee wasn't planning a direct assault. She spent 3 days conducting surveillance on the compound, studying the patterns of movement. The commander was cautious, rarely appearing outside, always surrounded by bodyguards when he did. But everyone had routines, and routines created vulnerabilities. Aimee identified the vulnerability on the evening of the 3rd day. The commander had a habit of standing on the compound's roof at sunset, surveying his territory like a king overlooking his domain. He'd spend 5 to 10 minutes up there, usually alone or with just one bodyguard. It was a small window of opportunity, but it was enough. Aimee and Ramirez established a sniper position in a partially collapsed building 912 meters from the compound. The range was at the absolute limit of her rifle's effective envelope, but she'd made longer shots in training. They waited for 2 days before the opportunity presented itself. On the evening of the second day, the commander appeared on the roof right on schedule. He was wearing traditional robes that billowed in the evening breeze, making him a challenging target. But Aimee had learned to account for wind and movement, to time her shots for the brief moments when her target was relatively still. "Range 912 meters, Ramirez whispered. "Wind 4 miles per hour, quartering from the left. Temp 71 degrees, humidity 48%. Aimee did the math. At this range, her bullet would drop nearly 13 feet and drift about 8 inches. The angle was slightly downward, which would affect the trajectory. The wind would push the bullet right, so she'd aim left to compensate. All of this processed in seconds, her brain performing calculations that would have taken most people minutes to compute with a calculator. The commander stopped walking for a moment, his robe settling around him as he gazed out over the city. For 3 seconds, he was relatively motionless. Aimee's breathing stopped. Her trigger finger increased pressure with infinite care. The rifle fired, 912 meters away, traveling at 2,700 feet per second. The bullet covered the distance in just over a second. It struck the commander in the upper chest, the impact spinning him around before he collapsed. The bodyguard reacted instantly, drawing a weapon and scanning for threats. But the shot had come from so far away that he had no idea where to look. By the time he figured out something was wrong, Aimee and Ramirez were already packing their gear. 3 minutes later, they were out of the building and melting into the evening crowds on the street. Just 2 more people among thousands, completely anonymous. The mission was complete. Over the next 2 weeks, the impact of that single shot became clear. The enemy forces, suddenly leaderless, fragmented. Their coordinated attacks stopped. Their sophisticated ambushes disappeared. Small groups still operated in the sector, but the organized threat had been decapitated. American casualties dropped to nearly 0. But Aimee's work wasn't done. With the main enemy force disrupted, she shifted her focus to providing overwatch for Ranger patrols, positioning herself where she could observe American movements and eliminate threats before they could materialize. It was during one of these overwatch missions that Staff Sergeant Chen's patrol walked into the kill zone that would have wiped them out if Aimee hadn't been watching. She'd been positioned on a rooftop 600 meters from where the ambush occurred, tracking the patrol's movement through her scope. She'd seen the enemy fighters moving into position, recognized the trap that was being set, and tried to warn the patrol via radio. But by the time they received her warning, they were already in the kill zone. The IED had already detonated. Enemy fire was already tearing into their position. So Aimee went to work. The first target was the enemy sniper who'd killed Jenkins, a fighter positioned in a 4th-floor window with a Dragunov rifle. Aimee put a round through his head before he could fire again. Then she shifted to the heavy weapons position, an enemy fighter with a PKM machine gun who was pouring fire into the Ranger's position. He died before he realized he was being targeted. Target after target, room to room, building to building. Aimee worked through the enemy force with mechanical precision, eliminating threats in order of lethality. The PKM gunner first, then the sniper, then the fighters with RPGs, then the ones coordinating the attack. Her rifle grew hot from sustained fire. Brass casings piled up around her position. But she maintained her rhythm, aim, calculate, fire, assess, shift to the next target, over and over, 37 times in less than 4 minutes. When it was done, when the last enemy fighter had either fled or died, Aimee took a moment to breathe. Her heart was racing. Her hands were rock steady, they always were when she was shooting, but she could feel the adrenaline starting to fade, replaced by the exhaustion that always followed intense combat. "Jesus, Collins," Ramirez breathed. I've never seen anything like that. 37 targets in 4 minutes. How did you even—" "Training," Aimee said quietly. She was already packing her rifle, preparing to displace. Staying in one position after engaging that many targets was asking to be found. And necessity. Those Rangers needed help. So I helped them. You did more than help them. You performed a goddamn miracle. Aimee didn't respond. She'd heard variations of that comment before, and she never knew how to answer. To her, it wasn't miraculous. It was just what needed to be done, and she had the skills to do it. They relocated to a new position 3 blocks away and established overwatch on the Ranger extraction point. 23 minutes later, exactly as promised, the ground QRF arrived to extract Chen's team. Aimee watched through her scope as the Rangers loaded their wounded into armored vehicles and pulled out of the ambush site. All of them alive. All of them going home. That's what mattered. That's what made the long hours, the danger, the weight of all those deaths on her conscience worthwhile. They were alive because she'd been there. Word spread quickly through the Ranger companies. Within days, every unit in the sector knew the story. A Ranger patrol had been trapped in a kill zone, surrounded by overwhelming enemy forces, minutes away from being wiped out. And then, a female sniper, someone most of them had never heard of, had appeared out of nowhere and single-handedly turned the tide. The Rangers started calling her the Ghost, a guardian angel who appeared when soldiers were in trouble, who never missed, who'd saved dozens of lives and then vanished without a trace. Aimee hated the nickname, but understood its necessity. The mystique, the legend, actually helped her mission. Enemy forces became cautious, paranoid about operating in the open. They knew there was a sniper out there somewhere, but they didn't know where, when she'd strike, or how to stop her. Fear was a weapon, and Aimee wielded it effectively. But the legend also brought complications. Other units began requesting her presence on their operations. Commanders wanted her attached to their patrols. Everyone wanted the Ghost watching over their soldiers. Colonel Harrington called her in for a meeting to discuss the situation. "Collins, you've become something of a celebrity," he said, gesturing to a stack of requests on his desk. "I've got every company commander in the sector asking for you. How do you want to handle this?" Aimee considered the question carefully. "Sir, I'm most effective when I'm operating independently. If you tie me to a specific unit, I lose my flexibility and the enemy can predict where I'll be. But if you let me continue ranging across the sector, I can respond to threats as they develop." That makes tactical sense, but it also means you're going to be spread thin. You can't be everywhere at once. "No, sir, but I can prioritize based on threat assessment and be where I'm most needed." Harrington nodded slowly. "All right. You'll continue operating with full autonomy, but I want daily situation reports so we know where you are and what you're seeing. And Collins, don't get yourself killed. You're too valuable to lose." "I'll do my best, sir." Over the next month, Aimee and Ramirez continued their operations across the northern sector. Some days were quiet, long hours of observation with no enemy contact. Other days were intense firefights where Aimee found herself engaging multiple threats in rapid succession. There was the day she saved a medical convoy that had been ambushed on a narrow mountain road, eliminating 15 attackers before they could destroy the ambulances carrying wounded soldiers. The call had come in at 1100 hours. A convoy of 3 ambulances escorted by 2 Humvees carrying 8 wounded soldiers to the field hospital had been hit hard. The ambush site was a nightmare, a narrow mountain pass with cliffs on one side and a steep drop on the other. The enemy had disabled the lead vehicle with an RPG, blocking the road, then opened fire from elevated positions on both sides. When Aimee and Ramirez arrived at a position overlooking the ambush site, the situation was critical. 2 medics were pinned down next to an overturned ambulance, trying to shield their patients from incoming fire. The Humvee gunners were returning fire, but they couldn't identify the enemy positions in the rocky terrain. "I count at least 15 hostiles," Ramirez said, scanning through his spotting scope. "Multiple fighting positions in the rocks. Range varies from 400 to 600 meters. Aimee settled behind her rifle and began working through the targets systematically. The first was an enemy fighter with an RPG, preparing to fire at the remaining ambulances. She took him as he lifted the launcher to his shoulder. The rocket fell from his dead hands and tumbled down the cliff face. Her second target was coordinating the ambush, speaking into a radio while directing fire. He was partially concealed behind a boulder, only his head and shoulders visible. Aimee put a round through his exposed chest. The radio went silent. She moved through the enemy positions like a reaper harvesting souls. A machine gunner who'd been suppressing the convoy. A sniper who'd wounded one of the Humvee drivers. 3 fighters preparing to rush the disabled ambulance. Each fell with mechanical precision, Aimee's shots timed to catch them in moments of vulnerability. The enemy force realized they were being hunted. Some tried to flee, scrambling up the rocky slopes. Others went deeper into cover, trying to hide from the invisible killer. Neither strategy saved them. Aimee tracked the fleeing fighters through her scope, leading their movement, firing when they thought they were safe. The ones who hid she marked and waited for. Patience rewarded when they eventually had to move or expose themselves to check on their fallen comrades. In 7 minutes, she'd eliminated all 15 attackers. The convoy was saved, the wounded soldiers secured, and the road cleared for extraction. There was the night she spent 12 hours in a freezing observation post, waiting for an enemy mortar team that intelligence said was targeting the patrol base. When they finally appeared at 3 in the morning, she eliminated them before they could fire a single round. There was the mission where she and Ramirez had to extract themselves under fire after their position was compromised, fighting their way through a hostile neighborhood while calling in air support. Through it all, Aimee maintained her focus. Every shot mattered. Every decision had consequences. She couldn't afford mistakes, couldn't allow herself to become complacent or overconfident. The stress was immense. The responsibility of knowing that soldiers' lives depended on her accuracy, her judgment, her ability to make split-second decisions in chaotic situations, it weighed on her constantly. But she never let it show. To the Rangers she protected, to the commanders who relied on her, she was always calm, always confident, always ready. Inside, though, she carried the weight of every life she'd taken and every life she'd saved. It was a burden that grew heavier with each passing day. 2 months into her deployment to the northern sector, something changed. The enemy, which had been largely reactive and defensive after losing their commander, suddenly became aggressive again. New attacks began hitting Ranger patrols, coordinated ambushes that showed the same level of sophistication as before. Someone new had taken command, someone who'd learned from the previous leader's mistakes. Intelligence confirmed it. A replacement commander had arrived in the sector, bringing with him weapons, equipment, and a fresh tactical plan. The enemy was reorganizing, preparing for a major offensive. Aimee studied the new intelligence reports with growing concern. The new commander was different from his predecessor, more cautious, more paranoid about snipers, harder to locate. He moved constantly, never staying in one place long enough to become a target. "This guy's smart," Ramirez said, reviewing the same reports. "He knows we took out his boss with a long-range shot, so he's making sure we can't do it again." "Everyone makes mistakes eventually," Aimee replied. "We just have to be patient and wait for him to make his." But patience proved difficult when the attacks intensified. The enemy launched a coordinated assault on Patrol Base Phoenix, hitting it with mortars and small arms fire for 3 hours before withdrawing. They ambushed another Ranger patrol, killing 1 soldier and wounding 3 more before Aimee could intervene from her overwatch position. The sector was heating up again, and American casualties were starting to climb. Colonel Harrington called an emergency meeting with all senior commanders in the sector. Aimee was invited as the subject matter expert on enemy operations. "The situation is deteriorating," Harrington said without preamble. "The enemy has reconstituted their forces, and they're hitting us harder than before. We need to disrupt their operations before this escalates into something we can't control." "What's the intelligence picture?" someone asked. "We've located their new command post, a compound in the eastern suburbs, heavily fortified and well guarded. But here's the problem. The new commander doesn't expose himself the way his predecessor did. He stays inside, runs his operations from a bunker, and only moves at night with heavy security." Aimee studied the photos of the compound. It was indeed a fortress, high walls, guard towers, multiple layers of security. A direct assault would cost dozens of American lives, and there was no guarantee they'd even find the commander before he escaped. "What if we don't assault it?" she said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. "Explain," Harrington said. "A frontal assault plays to their strengths. They're dug in, prepared, and they know we're coming. But what if instead of attacking the compound, we make them come to us?" "How?" Aimee pointed to the map. "They're attacking our patrol bases because they want to push us out of the sector. What if we give them a target they can't resist? Set up a new patrol base in a location that's strategically important but appears vulnerable. Make it look like we're overextending, like we've created a weak point in our defenses." "You want to use American soldiers as bait?" The question came from Major Richardson, and his tone was skeptical. "Not bait. A lure with sufficient force to defend itself, but positioned to appear vulnerable. The enemy commander will see an opportunity to inflict significant casualties and boost his credibility. He'll commit resources to the attack, including possibly showing up himself to oversee the operation." "And that's when you engage him," Harrington said, understanding dawning on his face. "That's when I engage everyone. We fortify the position with more strength than it appears to have, establish multiple sniper hides around the perimeter, and wait for them to come to us. When they attack, they walk into a killing field." The room was silent as the commanders considered the plan. It was aggressive, risky, and required perfect execution, but it also had the advantage of turning the enemy's tactical initiative against them. "I like it," Harrington said finally, "but it only works if we can pull off the deception. If they suspect it's a trap, they won't commit." "They'll commit," Aimee said with quiet confidence. "Their new commander is aggressive and he's trying to prove himself. Give him what looks like an easy target and he won't be able to resist." The plan was approved. Over the next week, Army engineers constructed a small patrol base on a hill overlooking a key intersection in the eastern sector. To all appearances, it was a standard forward position, a platoon-sized element in a somewhat exposed location meant to control the intersection and provide early warning of enemy movements. But appearances were deceiving. The patrol base had been reinforced with additional troops hidden in bunkers below ground level. Heavy weapons had been pre-positioned, but kept concealed. And around the perimeter, at distances ranging from 300 to 800 meters, Aimee had established multiple sniper positions. She wouldn't be alone this time. Colonel Harrington had brought in 2 additional sniper teams to support the operation. Together, they'd be able to cover every approach to the patrol base with overlapping fields of fire. "Remember," Aimee told the other snipers during the final briefing, "priority targets are command and control personnel, heavy weapons operators, and anyone with communications equipment. We want to cut off their head and their ability to coordinate. Once they're in disarray, the base defenders can handle the rest." "What about the commander himself?" one of the snipers asked. "If he shows up, he's mine. I've been tracking him for 2 months. I know his patterns, his habits. If he's there, I'll find him." The trap was set. Now they just had to wait. For 3 days, nothing happened. The patrol base operated normally, conducting patrols, establishing a presence, becoming a routine feature of the sector. Enemy scouts observed it, undoubtedly reporting back to their leadership about this new American position. On the 4th night, intelligence reported increased enemy communications and movement in the eastern sector. They were coming. Aimee settled into her primary sniper hide, a carefully constructed position in an abandoned warehouse 650 meters from the patrol base. Her M110 was loaded, her night vision equipment was ready, and she'd pre-calculated range cards for every possible target area. "All elements, this is Overwatch," she transmitted on the command net. "Stand by. Based on enemy communications, attack is imminent. Estimate 30 to 40 hostiles with possible heavy weapon support." "Overwatch base actual. Understood. We're ready." The attack began at 02:15, announced by the whistle of incoming mortars. The enemy had brought an 82mm mortar team, and they were dropping rounds directly onto the patrol base with impressive accuracy. But the base defenders had been expecting this. They took cover in reinforced bunkers while the mortars pounded the surface positions. The barrage lasted 10 minutes, creating a hellscape of explosions and flying shrapnel. When it finally stopped, an eerie silence fell. That's when the assault force moved in. Through her night vision scope, Aimee could see them advancing, multiple teams moving in coordinated rushes using fire and maneuver tactics that showed professional training. They were good, well-equipped, well-trained, and well-led, which made them dangerous. The first wave consisted of 12 fighters moving in 3 teams of 4. They advanced under covering fire from positions further back, leapfrogging forward in textbook infantry tactics. Aimee identified her first target, a fighter carrying a PKM machine gun who was moving into position to provide suppressive fire. He was fast, professional, staying low. She waited until he stopped moving and began setting up the gun, his attention focused on the patrol base. Then she squeezed the trigger. The suppressed crack of her rifle was lost in the noise of the battle. The machine gunner collapsed, dead before he could fire a single round. "Target down," she whispered to Ramirez, shifting to secondary. Her second target was moving faster, darting between cover positions. She led him slightly, anticipating his movement, and fired. The bullet caught him mid-stride. He tumbled forward and didn't get up. Around the perimeter, the other sniper teams were engaging as well. More enemy fighters dropped, their attack disrupted by invisible killers. But they were disciplined. They took cover, adapted their approach, and continued advancing. A team of 4 fighters tried to use smoke grenades to mask their approach. They popped 3 grenades and began moving through the concealment. Aimee switched to her thermal optics, which cut through the smoke like it wasn't there. She took them one by one as they emerged, each shot precisely timed. An RPG team set up on a rooftop 400 meters away, the gunner kneeling while his assistant prepped the rocket. Aimee put a round through the gunner's chest. The assistant tried to grab the launcher, apparently determined to complete the shot. He died before his hands touched the weapon. 2 enemy fighters with AK-47s tried to suppress the patrol-base defenders, firing long bursts from behind a low wall. Their muzzle flashes gave away their positions. Aimee engaged the left target first, then shifted smoothly to the right. Both died within 2 seconds of each other. The assault was faltering. The enemy had expected to overwhelm the patrol base with speed and numbers. Instead, they were being decimated by precision fire from positions they couldn't locate. Then Aimee saw him. At the rear of the enemy formation, partially concealed behind a stack of sandbags but visible through her thermal optics, was a figure that matched the intelligence profile of the new enemy commander. He was directing the attack, using hand signals and a radio to coordinate his forces. Even as she watched, he was pulling fighters back, trying to reorganize for a second assault. "I have positive ID on the commander," Aimee transmitted. 720 meters, partially concealed. "I'm engaging." It was a difficult shot. The target was moving, he was partially behind cover, and the range was challenging even under ideal conditions. At 700 meters, the bullet would take just over a second to reach the target, plenty of time for him to move if he saw the muzzle flash or heard the shot. But Aimee had made harder shots. She tracked him through her scope, watching his patterns of movement, learning his rhythm. He'd gesture to the left, duck down, move 3 steps right, come back up to scan the battlefield with binoculars. Predictable. She waited for the pattern to repeat. Gesture left, duck, move, come up, there. He rose from cover to scan with his binoculars, his body silhouetted against the lighter background of the sky. Aimee fired. The bullet covered 720 meters in just over a second. She watched through her scope as it impacted. The commander jerked and fell backward. But he wasn't dead. Through her scope, she could see him moving, trying to crawl to cover. She'd hit him, but not well enough. Maybe the bullet had deflected off equipment, or he'd moved at the last instant, or her calculations had been off by a fraction. It didn't matter. She needed to finish this. Aimee acquired him again in her scope. He was trying to drag himself behind a wall, leaving a blood trail. Wounded, but still dangerous. Her second shot ended the threat permanently. "Commander is down," she reported. "All elements, continue engagement." The battle continued for another 20 minutes, but without their leader, the enemy force lost cohesion. Some tried to retreat. Others froze in confusion. The patrol-based defenders and sniper teams systematically eliminated them. By the time dawn broke, it was over. The enemy assault force had been destroyed. 43 hostile fighters dead, including their commander. 0 American casualties. It was a complete, devastating victory. But Aimee felt no triumph, just exhaustion, and the weight of more deaths added to her count. 43 more lives taken, even though they'd been trying to kill American soldiers. She understood the necessity, accepted the responsibility, but that didn't make it easy. After the battle, Colonel Harrington personally visited her position. "Collins, that was outstanding work. You and your teams turned what could have been a disaster into a decisive victory." "Just doing my job, sir." "No, you did far more than your job. You've single-handedly changed the dynamics of this entire sector. Enemy forces are demoralized. They're afraid to operate in the open. We've broken their offensive capability for at least the next few months." Harrington paused. "I'm putting you in for a Silver Star." "That's not necessary, sir." "It's very necessary. What you've accomplished here deserves recognition." He studied her for a moment. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine, sir." "Are you?" "Because you've been operating at an intense pace for 3 months now. You've conducted over 100 confirmed kills. That's not nothing, Collins. That takes a toll, no matter how professional you are." Aimee didn't respond immediately. She appreciated Harrington's concern, but she didn't have time for self-examination or emotional processing. The mission came first. Her feelings were secondary. "I'm managing, sir. If I felt I couldn't do the job effectively, I'd say so." Harrington nodded, though he didn't look entirely convinced. "All right. Take 72 hours off. Rest. Decompress. That's in order." "Yes, sir." Those 3 days gave Aimee time to think, which she wasn't sure was a good thing. In the quiet of her quarters, away from the adrenaline and urgency of combat operations, she had to confront the reality of what she'd become. She was one of the most lethal snipers in Army history. Her kill count was approaching 150, and she wasn't even halfway through her deployment. She'd saved dozens of American lives and eliminated threats that would have killed many more. But she'd also taken 150 lives, men who'd woken up that morning not knowing they'd never see another sunset, mother's sons, someone's brother or father or friend. Aimee understood that war made these deaths necessary. She understood that every person she'd killed had been an active combatant trying to harm American soldiers. She understood the cold logic that said their deaths saved more lives than they cost. But understanding something intellectually and processing it emotionally were two different things. She thought about going home eventually, about trying to return to normal life after spending a year eliminating threats with clinical precision. How did you bridge that gap? How did you go from pulling triggers on human targets to having coffee with friends, or shopping at a grocery store, or doing any of the mundane things that normal people did? The thought terrified her more than any combat situation she'd faced. As on the 4th day, she reported back to duty. There was work to do, missions to plan, rangers to protect. The introspection could wait. It would have to wait, because somewhere out there, American soldiers were patrolling dangerous streets, and they needed someone watching over them. They needed a miracle. And Aimee Collins was in the business of delivering miracles, one precisely aimed shot at a time. The deployment continued. More missions, more threats eliminated, more lives saved, and the legend of the ghost grew, whispered among rangers who owed their lives to an invisible guardian with a rifle and a purpose. 6 months later, the helicopter banked hard, and Aimee watched the landscape scroll past below. After 12 months in theater, she was finally rotating home. Her deployment was over. The war, at least her part in it, was finished. Her final tally, 197 confirmed kills. 83 American soldiers directly saved from imminent death, countless others protected by her disruption of enemy operations. The numbers should have meant something. But sitting in the helicopter, heading back to a world that no longer felt like home, Aimee felt empty. She'd done her job, done it exceptionally well. But the cost, the weight of those 197 lives, the memories of every shot, every target, every moment when she'd decided who lived and who died, that weight hadn't disappeared just because her deployment ended. "You all right?" Ramirez asked over the internal comms. "Yeah, just thinking." About what comes next?" Ramirez nodded. "It's weird, isn't it? Spending a year in a war zone and then suddenly you're supposed to just go back to normal, act like none of this happened. Do you think we can? Aimee asked. I don't know, but I know we have to try. The helicopter landed at the airbase where they'd begin their journey home. As Aimee climbed out, gear bag over her shoulder, she took one last look at the landscape that had been her home for a year. The place where she'd become something more than just a soldier, a legend, a guardian, a miracle worker, but also the place where she'd lost pieces of herself that she wasn't sure she could get back. Come on, Collins, Ramirez said. Let's go home. Aimee nodded and followed him toward the transport plane. Home, such a simple word, such a complicated concept. She was going home. But the question that haunted her was simple and impossible. Could home ever really feel like home again? 4 months later, Aimee stood in front of a classroom at Fort Benning, looking at 23 students in various stages of sniper training. They stared back at her with a mixture of respect, curiosity, and skepticism. After rotating home, she'd been assigned to the sniper school as an instructor. Colonel Harrington had personally requested her, said her combat experience was too valuable not to share with the next generation of snipers. She'd accepted, though part of her still longed for the clarity of being downrange, where every action had immediate purpose and consequence. Today we're going to talk about something that doesn't get covered in the standard curriculum, she said, her voice carrying to the back of the classroom. The reality of pulling the trigger when there's a human being in your crosshairs. The students shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the usual technical discussion about ballistics or wind reading. Everything you've learned so far, the math, the physics, the techniques, all of that is important. But it's just preparation. The real challenge comes when you're looking through your scope at a target that's breathing, moving, living, and you have to make the decision to end that life. A student raised his hand. How do you deal with that? The psychological aspect? Aimee considered the question carefully. You don't deal with it. Not in the sense of making it go away. What you do is understand why you're doing it. Every person I eliminated downrange was actively trying to kill American soldiers. Every shot I took saved lives. That doesn't make it easy, but it makes it necessary. Do you regret any of them? Another student asked. I regret that they were necessary. I regret the circumstances that led to their deaths, but I don't regret protecting the people who needed protecting. Aimee paused. Here's what I want you to understand. Being a sniper isn't about killing. It's about saving. You pull the trigger because not pulling it means someone else dies. Someone on our side, someone who doesn't deserve to die, someone who's counting on you to keep them safe. The classroom was silent. You're going to hear people call snipers killers. They're wrong. Snipers are guardians, protectors. You operate in the shadows so that others can walk in the light. And when the moment comes, when someone whispers a prayer for a miracle, you answer that prayer with precision, skill, and absolute commitment. She could see some of the students nodding. Others still looked uncertain. That was fine. They'd understand eventually, once they deployed, once they faced their own moments of truth. If they were lucky enough to survive and skilled enough to succeed. After class, a young female soldier approached Aimee, Private First Class Martinez, one of only 3 women in the sniper training program. Staff Sergeant Collins, can I ask you something personal? Go ahead. When you first deployed, when you started doing what you do, did you ever doubt yourself? Did you ever think you couldn't handle it? Aimee studied the young woman. She saw something of her younger self there. The determination, the uncertainty, the hunger to prove herself. Every single day, she said honestly, I doubted whether I was good enough, strong enough, whether I could handle the pressure. The doubt doesn't ever completely go away. Then how did you do it? How did you become what you became? I decided that doubt was just noise. It didn't matter how I felt. What mattered was the mission and the people counting on me. So I showed up every day, did the work, pulled the trigger when necessary, and trusted my training. Aimee met Martinez's eyes. You want to know if you can do this? I can't answer that for you, but I can tell you that if you're willing to put in the work, if you're willing to carry the weight, if you're willing to answer when someone calls for a miracle, then yes, you can do this. Martinez nodded slowly. Thank you, Staff Sergeant. As the young soldier walked away, Aimee felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope, not for herself. She was still working through her own issues, still carrying the weight of 197 deaths, but hope for the future. Hope that there would be others like her, ready to step into the war zone with their rifles and their purpose. Ready to be guardians, ready to deliver miracles, because the war would continue. Soldiers would continue to face danger, and they would need snipers watching over them. Silent, invisible, deadly protectors who never missed and never quit. The Rangers would whisper their prayers for miracles, and somewhere, a sniper would answer, just as Aimee Collins had answered, just as she'd taught others to answer, one shot at a time, one life saved at a time, one miracle at a time, forever. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to hear more powerful stories of brave women in uniform.